Hi, everyone. So, year 2020 has seen an unprecedented economic downturn for which there is no playbook to look at in terms of investing, especially for people who are not professionals in investing. It's a good idea to diversify your investments across different geographies, different assets, and different risk segments, and also you look at diversifying in terms of your exposure towards futuristic businesses like innovation. And putting all this together, it's very difficult to choose exactly 3 to 4 ETFs for your portfolio. Now, it doesn't make sense to have 10, 20 ETFs chosen in a portfolio. The returns are going to be subpar, even less than the index returns. So if you have to really gain benefits from the ETF returns, it's a good idea to diversify a bit in terms of geographies, because we don't know which countries are going to be better after this COVID-19 situations, which economies would recover faster, which asset classes are going to do better. Even if you are looking at a longer term, like 10, 15 years, for example, the last 10 years, gold has outperformed many of the asset classes. So it's a good idea to diversify asset wise. And here is an analysis I've done just for illustrative purpose. What kind of 5 ETFs one can look at in terms of diversifying, at the same time get a good alpha in terms of returns over the next 5 to 10 years. Let's get into that. So before we proceed, that's a standard disclaimer. The vested interest might be there, but these are more of illustrative. Here are 5 ETFs based on slicing and dicing it across the diversification factors, risk adjusted factors. It's a good idea to choose maybe 4 or 5 max ETFs in a portfolio. That itself is little more, if you ask me. But for somebody who's willing to take that extra risk to go to the geographies which are like emerging markets or fast growing innovation funds, I mixed it up in such a way. So here are such 5 funds. Now the percentage of allocation can be chosen based on one's risk profile, but at least look at high growth segments like Nasdaq, which are going to have all the major technology companies, which are all kicking gears, well accelerating their earnings, and they've been doing pretty well in the last 5 to 10 years, and the growth is going to sustain for many of the high-end technology companies in the consumer e-commerce sector, in payments, in terms of the sectors which are uh, facing the consumers, also the cloud-oriented companies. All of them are going to do well. Now, so here you have 5 funds, 5 ETFs for, especially for millennials who are looking at a longer term, like 10, 15 years. This can fetch a great returns in terms of risk-adjusted basis. So the first one is Spider S&P 500. This is just mimicking, underlying indexes S&P 500. Symbol is SPY. Its geography is US, and it's based on large cap sectors. So it's a S&P 500 basically, as we all know, and the expense ratio is pretty low. It's the lowest among all. It's 0.09 percentage, which is pretty good. Then you have Invesco. The symbol is QQQ Trust, which is QQQ, and it's from the Invesco group. And this is most widely traded ETF in the world, tracking Nasdaq. So pretty interesting fund to track Nasdaq. So it's based on, again, US Nasdaq, but at the same time, we know Nasdaq has many other leading firms, technology firms, even from China and Brazil and Europe, also listed in Nasdaq. So that gives that geographical diversification. Expense ratio is zero point 0.2 percentage, which is nominal. And then the third ETF is iShares, which is MSCI, Morgan Stanley iShares Emerging Markets ETF. This is one of the best emerging market fund, which is run by Morgan Stanley. Symbol is EEM, and it's large and mid cap, stocks in the emerging market equities. So the expense ratio is 0.68 percentage, which is slightly higher, but they are giving the diversification, in terms of to the emerging markets, which might do, which has been an underperformer in the last 10 years. Actually speaking, since 2009-10, emerging markets has underperformed than the developed markets in terms of market returns mostly. And the next fourth ETF is asset diversification to look at gold. So this is iShares Gold Trust, which is sticker symbol is IAU, and it's the largest gold ETF by assets. Fund buys and holds physical gold, and with the aim of reflecting the spot price of gold. So that gives exposure to gold. One can even at least have 5% allocation to gold in the portfolio, if not more. The expense ratio is 0.25 percentage. Now that to take taken up with a pinch of salt, because gold has performed really well in the last 10 years, so might not keep up with similar returns in the future. But over the long term, 10-15 years, gold is going to keep up the value, and also might underperform equities, we don't know. So it's a good idea to distribute just 5% to gold. And final fund is, one needs to have at least 10% in this fund. I like this fund a lot. It's the ARC Innovation ETF. And this is a very it's a high end innovation fund which is targeted for futuristic growth opportunities. And the management is pretty strong, one who's running this. And they define disruptive innovation as the introduction of technologically enabled new product or service that potentially changes the way the world works. Examples are, I think the fund holds a major portion of the fund. I mean, major position in the fund is Tesla, for example, electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, biotechnologies, and many of the innovation areas in futuristic in payments, in terms of Bitcoin, crypto, blockchain technology, basically. So they are targeting all of the new age futuristic model. So it could have a good returns. This fund has returned really well over the last few years since launch, and they could be a good give a good impetus to the overall portfolio returns if you have at least 10-15 percentage in your portfolio. Now, one should not have a 60% in spider SPDR S&P 500 and then expect higher returns. That would just mimic the S&P returns, which is on an average 8 9 or max 10 percentage over 10 to 15 years. So have a distribution in such a way that it has a place for multiple assets. It has place for innovation and futuristic business. It has place for emerging markets, developed economies, and also varied asset classes like gold. So this kind of a portfolio would help. One can look at building it over a long period of time and forget about the day-to-day market variances and getting worried about the downturn in the markets. So this is more of an illustrative example. Hope this was helpful. So thanks for staying with me.